Hello everyone and welcome to my channel YNR Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The moment Nick Newman kicked open the rusted basement door, the echo of splintering wood rang like a gunshot through the darkness, dust and decay swirling in the stale air as his flashlight beam sliced across concrete walls stained with secrets, blood and despair. And there, huddled against the far corner, wrists raw from rope, face pale yet fiercely alive, was Sienna, her eyes lifting in disbelief as if she were seeing a ghost instead of the man she had prayed for every night while counting the seconds between Matt's footsteps. And as Nick rushed forward, dropping to his knees and cutting her free with shaking hands, the truth crashed over them both like a tidal wave, because behind them, sprawled near the basement stairs with lifeless eyes staring into nothingness, lay Matt's body, cold, unmoving, unmistakably dead. His reign of terror finally ended, though not without scars that would haunt Genoa City forever, and Sienna's breath hitched as she whispered his name, not in grief but in disbelief, her mind struggling to accept that the monster who had controlled her every move, every breath, every fear was gone, while Nick wrapped his jacket around her trembling shoulders, pulling her close as if shielding her from the memory itself. And it was then, with sirens wailing faintly in the distance and the weight of everything they had lost pressing down on him, that Nick leaned in, his voice breaking as he said the three words that shattered the silence. "You're safe now," words so simple yet so powerful they unlocked something inside Sienna that had been buried beneath weeks of terror, and she collapsed against him, sobbing not just for what she had endured but for the life she thought she would never reclaim, while Nick closed his eyes, guilt flooding his chest because he had been too late to prevent the suffering but just in time to save her soul. And as the police stormed the basement moments later, flashlights darting and voices shouting orders, the reality of Matt's death began to unravel in layers far more complicated than anyone expected, because whispers spread quickly that this was no accident, no simple fall or heart attack, but the final consequence of a web of lies that stretched from the darkest corners of Genoa City to the highest towers of Newman Enterprises. And as Chance examined the scene with grim precision, his expression darkened when he noticed the broken chain near Matt's hand and the faint bruising around his neck, suggesting a struggle that raised the terrifying question: who really killed Matt, and why did Nick look like a man carrying a secret heavier than the truth itself? Because while Nick insisted he found Matt already dead, flashes of memory haunted him. Matt lunging, Sienna screaming, a desperate shove, a sickening crack, and though Nick knew he had acted to save a life, the fear of becoming the villain in someone else's story gnawed at him relentlessly. And upstairs, as paramedics loaded Sienna onto a stretcher, Sharon arrived breathless, her eyes locking onto Nick's with a mixture of relief and suspicion, sensing instantly that this rescue came at a cost that had yet to be revealed, while Victor Newman watched from the shadows, his jaw tightening as he realized that Matt's death might ignite a chain reaction capable of destroying everything the Newmans had fought to protect, because Matt hadn't just been a captor. He had been a ticking time bomb of evidence, leverage and secrets involving powerful names that would soon surface. And as Sienna was wheeled away, she reached for Nick's hand one last time, whispering through tears that Matt had been planning something catastrophic, something that would burn Genoa City to the ground. A warning that sent chills through Nick's spine because it meant Matt's death did not end the nightmare but merely opened the door to a far more dangerous chapter, one where allies would become enemies and love would be tested beyond recognition. And later that night, alone in the dimly lit Newman living room, Nick replayed the moment he said those three words over and over again, realizing they weren't just a promise to Sienna but a vow to himself to face whatever consequences came next, even if it meant standing against his own family, because somewhere deep inside, he knew the truth would surface, that Matt's death was only the beginning, that Sienna's survival would expose lies buried for years, and that Genoa City would never be the same again. As the camera lingered on Nick's haunted expression and faded to black, leaving one devastating question hanging in the air. Who will pay the ultimate price now that Matt is dead? And can love truly survive when salvation comes at such a deadly cost? As dawn crept over Genoa City with a deceptive calm that mocked the chaos beneath its polished skyline, Nick Newman stood alone in the hospital corridor outside Sienna's room, the sterile white walls closing in on him as every second echoed with the weight of what had happened in that basement. Because Matt was dead, Sienna was alive, and the truth sat somewhere in between like a loaded gun waiting to fire. And when the doctor finally emerged to say Sienna was stable but emotionally fragile, Nick exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, though relief quickly curdled into dread when Chance arrived moments later, his expression unreadable as he asked Nick, too calmly, once again to walk him through the timeline, every detail, every movement, every sound, forcing Nick to relive the moment Matt lunged from the shadows, the flash of madness in his eyes, the instinctive shove meant to protect Sienna, and the horrifying realization that the fall had been fatal, because though Nick never intended to kill Matt, intent meant little when a man lay dead at the bottom of concrete steps, and as Chance listened scribbling notes, his silence spoke louder than any accusation, planting the terrifying possibility that Nick might soon become the prime suspect in a case that would shatter his family, his reputation, and whatever fragile peace Sienna had just begun to reclaim. And when Sharon arrived, her presence was both comfort and confrontation, her eyes searching Nick's face, until she finally whispered, "What aren't you telling me?" A question that cut deeper than any interrogation, because Sharon knew Nick too well to believe in coincidences, and Nick, torn between honesty and protection, could only say that sometimes saving someone meant losing yourself in the process, words that sent a chill through her as she realized this nightmare was far from over, and inside her hospital room, Sienna stared at the ceiling, replaying Matt's final moments not with triumph but terror because she remembered his last words, "It doesn't end with me." A threat that now pulsed like a warning siren in her mind, convincing her that Matt had allies, contingency plans, secrets embedded so deeply they would surface only now that he was gone, and when Nick finally entered her room, she reached for him with trembling hands, confessing through tears that Matt had been recording everything, conversations, bribes, confessions, using her as leverage to control powerful people, including someone Nick never expected to hear named, a revelation that made the room spin as Sienna whispered that Matt believed Victor Newman himself would do anything to keep those files buried. And suddenly Nick understood why Victor had watched the basement scene with such calculated silence, because this wasn't just about rescue or justice, it was about control, legacy and survival, and as Victor later summoned Nick to the ranch, his voice cold and deliberate, he made it clear that the official story would remain exactly as the police reported it. Matt died accidentally, Sienna was rescued, end of story, but Nick, haunted by Matt's threat and Sienna's fear, realized that silence might be the most dangerous choice of all, especially when anonymous messages began appearing on his phone that night, each one more chilling than the last. "You freed her, but you doomed them all. The basement wasn't the end. Tick-tock, Newman." And as Nick deleted the messages with shaking hands, he knew someone out there had been watching everything, waiting for Matt's death to activate a plan already in motion, and the tension escalated when the medical examiner's preliminary report hinted at injuries inconsistent with an accidental fall, prompting whispers within the department and fueling Chance's growing suspicion that Nick was hiding something crucial, while at Newman Enterprises, Victoria uncovered irregular financial transfers tied to shell companies Matt once controlled, proof that his reach extended far beyond a single crime, and when Phyllis caught wind of the investigation, her instincts screamed that this story would explode into a scandal capable of destroying multiple families, pushing her to dig where she shouldn't, unaware that her curiosity might put her directly in the crosshairs of whoever was pulling the strings now. And as days passed, Sienna's condition worsened emotionally despite physical recovery, nightmares gripping her so violently she begged Nick not to leave her side, confessing that Matt had promised she would wish he was still alive once the truth came out. A statement that haunted Nick as he began connecting dots between Matt's death and a sudden increase in surveillance around Newman properties. Because black SUVs had begun appearing on quiet streets, familiar faces started acting evasive, and trust, already fragile in Genoa City, crumbled under the weight of unspoken fears. And when Chance finally confronted Nick with evidence suggesting a struggle preceded Matt's death, Nick faced the impossible choice of confessing everything or protecting Sienna from reliving the trauma on the stand, knowing either path would lead to devastation, and in a moment of brutal honesty, Nick admitted there was more to the story but refused to elaborate, a move that instantly escalated the investigation and placed him under unofficial scrutiny, while Victor, furious at Nick's defiance, warned that truth without strategy was suicide. Chilling reminder that in this family, morality often bowed to power, and as father and son clashed, their argument exposed years of resentment, with Nick accusing Victor of creating monsters like Matt through manipulation and fear, and Victor firing back that survival required sacrifices Nick had never been strong enough to make, words that echoed ominously when Sienna overheard part of the confrontation. and realized she was no longer just a victim but a catalyst for war. And the tension reached a breaking point the night Sienna vanished from the hospital, her bed empty for ripped out, a single message left behind in shaky handwriting. "I won't let anyone else die because of me," sending Nick into a panic as he realized Matt's final threat was unfolding exactly as promised, because if Sienna had turned herself over to Matt's unseen allies to protect the Newmans, then Matt's death hadn't ended the nightmare at all. It had only transformed it into something far more dangerous, something alive, calculating, and relentless. And as Nick stormed into the night searching for her, the haunting echo of his 3 words, "You're safe now," rang bitterly in his ears because safety in Genoa City was an illusion, and the cost of survival was about to be far higher than anyone imagined. By the time Nick Newman found Sienna, it was already too late to save the future he had been fighting for, because the abandoned lakeside house stood silent under a sky bruised with storm clouds, its windows dark, its door hanging open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. And as Nick stepped inside, his heart pounding louder than the thunder outside, he sensed immediately that this was not a rescue but a reckoning, because the air was heavy with gasoline and regret. And there, in the center of the room, surrounded by photographs torn from Matt's hidden files, images of Victor shaking hands with criminals, Victoria signing off on shell accounts, Sharon listening through a door she never admitted to standing behind, stood Sienna, her eyes hollow yet resolute, holding a detonator with trembling fingers as tears streamed down her face. And in that horrifying instant Nick realized the ultimate truth Matt had engineered before his death. Sienna had never been meant to survive as a victim. She had been shaped into the final weapon, the one who would expose everything by destroying herself along with the lies that had protected Genoa City's most powerful families for decades. And as Nick slowly raised his hands, begging her to step away, to breathe, to remember that she was free now, Sienna shattered him with a whisper that cut deeper than any scream. "Freedom doesn't erase what he turned me into." And she confessed that after Matt died, his encrypted files had unlocked automatically, sending evidence to multiple recipients, including her, proof that Matt's crimes had been sanctioned, covered up, or quietly ignored by people Nick loved and trusted. And as Nick pleaded that they could take the evidence to the police, to the press, to the world, Sienna shook her head, sobbing as she explained that justice would never touch men like Victor Newman, that the truth would be buried, rewritten, or weaponized, and that the only way to end the cycle was to become the final consequence, the moment no amount of money or power could erase. And outside, as the storm erupted in full fury, Chance and Sharon arrived too late, watching from a distance as the house flickered with interior lights, unaware that every second slipping by was sealing their fate. And when Nick took a step closer, voice breaking as he said her name like a prayer, Sienna smiled sadly and reminded him of the 3 words he'd given her in the basement, the words that had saved her life but also doomed her heart. "You're safe now," and she told him safety was temporary, but truth was eternal. And before Nick could reach her, she pressed the detonator not to trigger an explosion but to activate a live broadcast, screens across Genoa City lighting up simultaneously with Matt's recordings, confessions spilling into the public like blood into water, Victor's voice coldly ordering silence, executives bribing officials, lives destroyed in the name of power. And as chaos erupted citywide, sirens screaming and phones ringing unanswered, Sienna dropped the detonator, collapsing to her knees as if her strength had finally abandoned her. And Nick rushed forward, cradling her as she whispered that she was sorry, that she never wanted to hurt him, but that some stories demanded a tragic ending to finally be believed. And in that moment of fragile calm, when it seemed the worst might be over, fate delivered its final cruelty, because a single gunshot rang out from the darkness outside the house, a silenced weapon fired by one of Matt's remaining allies who had been sent not to retrieve Sienna but to erase her. And the bullet tore through the window, striking Sienna in the chest as Nick screamed her name, blood blooming across her shirt as she gasped for breath, eyes locking onto his one last time with an expression of heartbreaking peace, because she had completed her purpose. And as Nick held her, begging her to stay, promising her safety he could no longer give, Sienna whispered her final words. "Now they can't look away," before her body went still in his arms, and in that instant Nick Newman broke in a way he never would recover from, his scream swallowed by thunder as Chance burst into the room too late to save her but just in time to witness the truth standing exposed and irreversible. And as dawn broke over Genoa City, the fallout detonated far more violently than any bomb ever could, because Victor Newman was arrested live on air, his empire crumbling in real time as allies vanished and enemies emerged from the shadows, Newman Enterprises stock collapsed, families turned on one another, and trust became a casualty no one could mourn properly, while Nick, cleared of Matt's death but condemned by survival, stood at Sienna's graveside days later, haunted by the realization that saving someone's life does not always mean saving their soul. And as he whispered those 3 words again into the cold air, "You're safe now," they rang hollow, because safety had cost Sienna her life. Truth had demanded blood, and Genoa City would never again be able to pretend its power was clean, its heroes innocent, or its monsters gone. As the camera slowly pulled back from Nick standing alone beneath a gray sky, the echo of Matt's final warning finally fulfilled, leaving one chilling truth behind. Sometimes the real tragedy isn't who dies, but what finally comes to light when they do.